Again, thank you all for coming to the Street Photography Mentor inaugural masterclass. I'm looking to do this probably once a month, 100% free, just sharing stuff. And yeah, it's easier to get stuff out this way than trying to constantly type stuff in because I can answer questions and just go off on my tangents that I always try to bring back into the realm of where we're actually talking. So, hello everybody. For those that don't know me, I'm gonna try to make a very brief bio. I'm Keith Pitts, obviously the street photography mentor. I've been a professional photographer for about 28 years. For about half of that, I got into street photography just to kind of cleanse the soul. Even when I was working for people, the whole yeah, taking people's money and they get to buy my time. It's still fun. I just love to have a camera, and the idea that if you love what you do, you never work a day. So I've never worked a day in almost 30 years. That said, things start to get old and a bit stale. So in order to not eventually resent photography, I started to shoot for myself. So I'd go out in the streets and kind of rekindle what drew me to photography in the first place. I think a lot of people can kind of relate to that, where a lot of people that, even people that do photography for a profession, sometimes, well, they should look and find some other way to make it interesting. And plenty of people that are just amazing photographers who have other jobs do it so that they can, again, clear their head and nurture their artistic side. So that's where I am. I have done pretty much, I've dipped my toes in all sorts of stuff. I started in commercial photography. I have been a wedding photographer for the entire time. I'm not doing those anymore. Actually, I'm not doing most of it anymore. And at this point, I'm just looking to teach and enjoy my life in Paris and see my kids grow and yeah, and kind of do the whole living life before you have no more. So that's where I'm at. So, like I said, that's a very, very small wrap up of my CV. So, yeah, again, not knowing the complete etiquette of this and that we go around was introducing everybody. If we were doing a workshop here, I'd say, okay, well, let's all get to know, but I know we all have limited time and we're all in different parts of the world. So, uh, to the topic at hand, slow shutter street photography. So it's slow shutter photography, and you all know what that is, correct? Mm-hmm. So the reason, again, it can be used in fine, and frequently is in fine art and pretty much any what's genre of photography, but I'm dealing specifically with street. And the reason you would do it in street photography is to show the passing of time in a way versus just freezing motion, which in probably better than 80% of the time, that's what you do and what you want to do. But sometimes you just get tired of that and you want to show in a still photograph, you want to uh, allude to the passage of time. But again, it's a still non-moving image. Like, how do you do that? So slow shutter speed photography. I think that's pretty, that's pretty much the what and the why. Uh, before I get on into like the how, is there any questions, anything you want to talk about before I'm going to get into like settings and all that kind of good stuff? So
I have a quick question, Keith. So, in
sure.
what specific, you said 80% of the time it's stop motion, and typically
Yeah.
when I shoot it, it's at 1/500th or 1/1000th. So, what is like the 20% that you would think about using the slow shutter speed?
Actually, I'm going to show some examples. Sure. I'll show some examples now and then I'll show them quick and then we'll get back to them after that. So so before I show the examples, hey, could you say, maybe the examples it's easier. And I'll talk over them. Okay. Share screen. We'll move past that and I'll come back to that later. Okay. So I easily could have just photographed this little boy sitting there studying and caught this guy completely sharp. It would have still been a good image, but it's just nice when you see this. It kind of gives you like the tension of nothing going on. The kid's lost in his own little world, and this guy's obviously kind of rushing by. You would have known that he's on a bike and he's doing that. Your brain will bring you there if it's just sharp, but it just gives you another way, kind of an impressionistic way of showing it. Here you've got a woman who's just kind of lost. And so she's just stopped and doesn't know where she is or what's going on, as far as I can tell. And the world just kind of going on about their business around her. We don't really need to see their faces, and we don't need to see who they are. We know what they're doing, and you just by seeing what's with the motion, you can just see kind of like how, in a way, it emphasizes kind of like how lost she is. Kind of like you can just add that to the look on her face. Same kind of thing, only no one's lost here. So it's just another matter of, okay, we're on a busy street, which happens to be Paris, which is unimportant. It's just another way. Like if you showed this everybody 100% sharp, it would, again, it would be roughly the same. It's an interpretation. Just another way. Like there's no one way to do anything for the most part. So you just want to have multiple tools to get to the same, to basically build the same thing. I'm trying to figure out what kind of analogy I can use. I'm not a carpenter, so when I start using tool analogies, I'm going off in the weeds. Again, so you kind of get the point here. And just people down by Gare Saint-Lazare. If anybody familiar with Cartier-Bresson, Gare Saint-Lazare is the site of his most famous photograph, only it's behind. The other day, about 2 weeks ago, I was walking around. I'm like, I want to find out. I'm determined to find out where that shot was taken. And I located it. So again, it looks a little bit different now, but the clock tower is still there. Okay, so this is Cuba, and really what's good. There's all sorts of stuff you can read into this, but the car in motion being blurred, I think, just adds a little bit to just the utter decay and the kind of the passing of time in this guy. And that's the other beautiful thing about photography. You can read into it, or any art. You can read, we can all look at this and get a completely different meaning out of the whole thing. Same thing, similar technique, just from a different angle. I'm going to demonstrate a technique. Again, this is panning. Right? Typically, when panning, which is a slow shutter speed technique, so that they combine. Most often with panning, you're going left to right, right to left. You're basically parallel to your subject. Now, if your subject is coming at you diagonally, you can still pan and get sometimes more interesting shots than just if you did the lateral pan. So this is just an example of that. Again, you get to see what's good. There's a bunch of people in the street. This is 2018. France had just won the World Cup. And yeah, I went around like a kid in a candy store that day, photographing everything and everybody. And at this point, I was, again, it was starting to get darker. And here I'm actually bracing the camera on one of the rails, looking over. So because I couldn't possibly handhold that and get everything else as sharp as, and I don't carry tripods with me. 99, very nearly 100% of the time, you can bet I don't have a tripod on me. So again, tripod is a very valid way to do this if you're going out with that in mind. Here, just a street in Rome, you can see just showing what's going that I know that she's been sitting there for the entire time it took to make these little sand sculpture dogs. But she's no longer doing that. She's just looking at her phone, it appears. Basically, she's just been in that one spot, not moving forever, while everybody else just walks around her. Fairly slow, but you can, when you're panning, again, a slow shutter technique, there doesn't have to be a lot going on. Again, sometimes panning or using a slow shutter speed will add some interest to something that can use a little help. So it just gives you another thing. It's typically it's not you're not in 100% control of it. So what you're going to get is, again, it's kind of like opening up a present. You have an idea what you're going to get, but you can't be 100% sure. So the better you get at it, the more likely you are to know roughly. But even though I've been doing this for years, you're never 100% sure how it's going to come out. But the more you practice, the better you get at it. And if this were 100% sharp, I'm not sure that I would like it as much. Again, the color harmony works well. The composition's there. It would probably be okay, but I think it's just a little bit more exciting with the blur and the nun was good. Just she's not 100% sharp, but you don't necessarily need it to be 100% sharp with these techniques. Washington, D.C. that night. This was handheld. This was shot with I typically shoot with a Leica, so there's no in-body stabilization. There's pretty much nothing. It's just fun to use. This I shot a while back, and I was using, I think, a Sony. It had in-body stabilizations, which is why it's that dark. Those cars are that blurred, and the Capitol is that sharp. Yeah, again, without a tripod or in-body stabilization, I couldn't have done that. So again, that went through that. I may pull out something from there later on. I need to do share, stop share. Up there. Okay. So did I over explain that or did not explain it at all?
No, well, I thought it was excellent. I have one question about
Sure.
in the shot with well, two questions. One,
Okay.
do you go out with the intention of shooting slow shutter speed photographs so that you have certain settings, whatever, or certain ideas of what you want to do? But second, the picture of I assume she was a nun, the blue.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. You could also achieve something like that, I suppose, with just a shallow depth of field, right?
Actually,
So you actually with the Leica, they talk about the bokeh and all of that. Is that
yeah.
a
Well,
different look?
no, again, really, if you try to do that with just bokeh, and it wouldn't really matter what camera you use, it's gonna look totally different because the difference between let me pull that back up a second. So the difference between motion blur versus again just shallow depth of field. So when you're doing a pan or any slow shutter speed technique for the most part, I'm going to get into the settings in a second, but just in a nutshell, since the amount there's within a certain parameter, like there is one correct amount of light, whatever your ISO is. So the exposure triangle, like whenever you add to one side, you got to take off the other. And if there's artistic flair you can throw in, you can zhuzh it a little bit, but for the most part, it's within a certain ballpark. It can't be so far out that it's going to be all white or all black. So that said, once you slow the shutter speed down, you have to make your aperture smaller. So if I'm going to, at this point, I was probably at, I started about a 30th of a second. This could have been less than that, but say I'm at a 30th of a second in daylight. If I were trying to use a shallow depth of field, this would be completely white. Like it would be way overexposed. So to compensate for how slow your shutter is, you have to stop down the aperture. But if you like shallow depth of field, you're in luck because everything is going to be blurred anyway. If you're panning, this is slow shutter speed, but in a pan versus here where I'm not panned, this is slow shutter speed, and you get a bunch of depth of field. And what's good, this is only achieved because I had the in-body stabilization, which worked apparently really, really well. Yeah. So the difference when you're using a slow shutter speed, unless you're using you all know what neutral density filters are? Does anybody not know what it is? Okay, Becky. A neutral density filter is basically just a glass filter goes in front of your lens that's varying shades of gray. So depending on which strength you get, they come in typically in full stops. You can get one that can dial in from like one stop in increments all the way down to like 10 stops, which is crazy. You wouldn't be able to see through your lens. So you would look like you had a lens cap on. but light is still coming in. What that does is if you've got so much light that you want like a shallow depth of field, and like if you say you're on a tripod or what, you want shallow depth of field and motion blur, you'd be out of luck in almost every situation if you didn't have neutral density. So that's about the only way you could really achieve a shallow depth of field in a non-moving, like when your camera's not moving and you have a slow shutter speed. So if your slow shutter speed, your camera moves, it blurs everything except for the thing you're tracking. So it doesn't really matter what your depth of field is. If your camera's stationary, so like it is here, then you've got to make the choice. Okay, you're going to know that everything not moving is going to be in focus. So, okay, that said, I'll bring up this first image. This is, so I don't know, again, it's a famous image, but again, I'm a geek for all this. Like to me, I recognize it. I don't expect most people to. So I'm just going to go. So this is Louis Daguerre's image from 1930 or 1838. It's of Paris. It's not too far from where I'm sitting right now. But what makes it notable, aside from being really old, is that it's, as far as we know, it's the first ever photograph that includes people. Can you see my cursor? Okay. So down here in the lower left, there's what appears to be a man. The reason it's good that he looks like he's the only person in like after like some zombie apocalypse is because this is a 10-minute exposure. There was no shutter in the camera. This is the shutter is Louis Daguerre putting in the lens cap back on the lens after about 10 minutes of guessing this is how long it should take. So this guy wouldn't be there either if he didn't stop to get his shoe shined. And if this kid who's doing it was really, really fast, no one would know this. But this is an extreme example of slow shutter speed photography. So this is a 10-minute exposure making Paris look like a ghost town. You could do the same thing in New York, Mumbai, wherever you wanted to go. If you had the ability to keep your shutter open long enough without overexposing your film or your sensor or whatnot, so you could make this happen. You could do it, but you'd have to have a tremendous amount of neutral density on there. So like this is a do not try this at home kind of thing right here. Unless you have a daguerreotype or you have the ability, which people can still do. It's a really intriguing, beautiful process, very, very dangerous, and drove a lot of the people that did it mad. This is completely off base, but with daguerreotypes, when they developed them, they had to develop them in a mercury vapor. And so anybody who's knows why you don't want to just be breathing in mercury vapor fumes, that's it'll dry. At best, you're going to go crazy, which is the whole mad as a hatter thing. That's kind of where that came from with mercury. Okay, now we'll get back to slow shutter speed photography. Okay. We were talking about things based on settings, so I'll talk about settings. So if you're going, actually, I'm going to get to Larry's question about, do I go out thinking about this in advance? Typically, no. Again, I'm fairly reactionary. I'm what I would consider a gatherer versus a hunter. I meander around the life with a camera in my hand, and I see things, and they interest me or they don't. And so and if at some point I decide, well, I just feel like doing some slow shutter speed work, I do it. That's why I never have a tripod on me. If I was going to do this purposely, then yeah, taking a tripod with me would be a smart thing to do, because I wouldn't have to look for things to set it on, which again, I've successfully done. Years ago, I once actually used a friend's head. I was in a really dark spot, so I just told him to stand there. I put the camera on top of his head. Took a couple shots because the first one was completely ruined because he didn't know what I was doing. But I wouldn't recommend that. But it's all improv. So now going out, and if you don't have, whether you have a tripod or not, so if you're carrying one around, what you do, depending on your light level outside it. Right now I'm in Paris in the winter. It's gray all the time. I'm rarely off of ISO 400. Like But ISO 400 is my youth ever since the film days. It's my go-to. Like that's where I start. So you want to make sure your ISO is relatively low if you're going to do the slow shutter speed stuff. So like I would probably bring it down to 100 if your camera, if we're all using digital. Not all cameras go to 100. Some go lower, some go higher, whatever. Bring it down to the bottom. Get your, I typically can start as a rule of thumb. I put my shutter speed at about a 30th of a second. And then as you do this and get a feel for it, you'll find like that might work for you. You might find that you just intentionally would like to go at a 45th or a 15th. It doesn't really matter. Just give yourself like some place where you're comfortable as a starting point. So I'm gonna say ISO 100. I get my shutter speed to a 30th of a second. Now, knowing the exposure triangle, I have to compensate with my aperture. And then if that doesn't work, I then also have to add neutral density, but we'll just assume no neutral density for now. So I say at 100, 30th of a second, I'm probably going to be shooting around like f16. Now that's going to give me a tremendous amount of depth of field, but it won't matter because, well, it will matter. If the camera's not moving, then you're just going to have I personally think it's more my style anyway, to have everything not moving and have it just tremendous depth of field. It kind of adds more of a counterpoint to the people, the cars, the dogs, whatever that happens to be in motion. If you couple that with shallow depth of field, it just visually, I think, becomes mushy. But again, it's your own personal taste. It's like we're all making a stew. We all make it the way we want. Certain rules apply, but outside of those certain rules, you can do what you want. So in general, as long as your ISO is down, your shutter speed is slow, however you get your exposure to the way that you want it is fine. So it'll bring out your personal taste. So doing that, if you're going to handhold it, you need to be steady. The good thing about this technique is also you're not expecting, there's errors that can be brought in, and it doesn't have to be clinically sharp. The spots that are just sharper than the things that are moving. And I'll bring up an example. Again, Bresson had said that sharpness is a bourgeois concept, and I seem to live by that. And say here, I'm probably at a 30th of a second, handheld, and nothing here. There's not a single piece of this image that is critically sharp. They're sharp enough. And again, most of my photography, my personal photography, I go by sharp enough because I get, yeah, everybody's got their own thing. I know people that, and nobody's right, nobody's wrong. Like the way I do it doesn't mean this is how it has to be done. I've had long discussions on sharpness with people, and no one wins because it doesn't really matter. If you like it and it conveys what you're trying to convey, perfect. If it has to be on a tripod and everything has to be absolutely razor sharp, that's your thing, perfect. There is no right or wrong. It's just like how much spice do you want to put in your stew? Sometimes I'm very, very stable, and this does have some very, very sharp stuff. Like I've got a pretty stable hand, but the point is that it doesn't have to be. And then when you start to pan, then let's go, yeah, there's nothing that, say, nothing in this is 100% sharp. But again, it doesn't have to be. It's interpretive. So it's how you want to do it and how you want to show it. So let's see if, yeah, okay. Get off the stop share. So I'm going to get up and show you like just a technique for holding the camera, which again, it's not necessarily intuitive when you see, and when I explain this to you, like, oh, of course. But if you don't think about it this way, then it might not seem, and you're going to have some blurrier photos where you don't want them to be. So grab a camera. All right, I didn't think I was bringing props into this, but I am. Okay, so camera in hand. Slow shutter speed, yada, yada, settings are done. Now, wherever you're this is kind of like if anybody's ever fired a rifle, I was in the military, so this is kind of natural for me. What you want to do is, say you start with you can't see my feet, but my feet are shoulder width apart. So I'm gonna now take a little step back on whichever dominant foot you like. And then put my weight back on my breast on my rear foot. And then bring my hand right here and dig the elbow into the side. Camera goes here, other elbow comes in, and you tuck them both in. It's not necessarily comfortable, but it's secure. It's as secure as you're going to get. You look through, you compose, keep the elbows tucked in against your body. Exhale, and as you're exhaling, you push down. So click. So again, it's exactly like if you're an archer or if you're a marksman of some sort, that if you push, if you release the shutter as you exhale, it's just one more it's one more moment where you could just accidentally mash. Like if you just pick the camera up, click, there's just a lot more vibration that gets transmitted to the camera body and the lens, and it's kind of like a fulcrum effect. You'll just have more motion from there. So which you don't want to do. My glasses down, so you're all blurry to me now. It's kind of like I'm slow shutter eyes. So, and I don't know how well that just translated for me trying to demonstrate this live. Did everybody get that? Was it ambiguous? Because I'm happy to fully explain it more.
No, it makes sense. The only thing I was thinking is if you're panning, it's the same idea. You're tucking your
It's
elbows
exactly,
in,
yes, it's
and then you're
exactly the same.
just
What you're doing
moving.
with the panning, you're doing the exact same thing,
Right,
only at the waist, you just follow along.
right.
So yeah, that's the yes, exactly. It's the same basic principle, and just you're twisting at the waist if you're panning. Other than that, there's zero difference between the two techniques. Like just yeah, that's exactly the same thing. So that's why I wanted to kind of combine with the slow shutter speed, because you can break panning up into one category and then the whole, but they're both the exact same technique. One just has, you're just twisting along. And obviously you want to try to match the motion of what if you're panning, you want to match the motion speed of what you're panning with. Another thing that's critically important is composition doesn't go out the window just because you're shooting like a slow shutter speed and things are moving and you're not 100% sure what you're going to get. You still have to be aware of the composition. So let's say if you're panning, that takes, if it's just a slow shutter and your frame is still, it's easy. Nothing changes. When you're panning, you're trying to keep that thing that's moving in a certain spot within your frame. So it's definitely more complicated, but with practice, it like anything, it becomes relatively simple. But panning is a harder technique to get, but like anything, once you do it, you'll wonder how you ever had a hard time with it. It's pretty straightforward. But once you get that stance, trust me, that is one of the key things. Like that's where you can make or break everything. I hate rules, so you don't have to do that. That is going to make your success rate better. So if whatever your percentage, your percentage will be higher if you adopt that stance. And just because it's the most stable position to expose your frame from. I don't want to, you constantly use shooting metaphors. So when I not say the S word, I try not to. So we're photographers. We're not, yeah, we're doing no harm. So let me see if it just on my little notes here. Yep. I think I've got most of that covered. So is there any question? Again, as I'm talking, I just go, and I'm not sure if I've gone over some. I know in my head I've gone down the list, but I want to make sure that I've fully answered everybody's questions.
I don't know if I should ask this question now, but can you hear me?
Yeah,
Um, how close are you? And like, I've never really done street photography. Do people ever get uncomfortable, ask you what you're doing? Like, how do you deal with
yeah,
that?
they do. Not often, but yeah, it's rare actually. And it depends on how you do it. Are you guys cool with talking? Again, this is just slightly off topic. Okay. So a lot of it has to do with how you carry yourself. If you walk around feeling I'm doing something wrong, I hope they don't catch me, you're going to get caught because somehow you're broadcasting that you're being shady. If you just walk around, you're not doing anything wrong. You're just taking photographs, just like all the amazing old photographs you've seen historically in books and wherever, all were taken by somebody that was doing the exact same thing. And when you look back at this, like, wow, that guy was a creep. I'm like, that Bresson character. Like, oh, no. But if you walk around feeling that you're doing something wrong, it's like dogs can smell fear, people can smell creeps. Let's go. And if you're just trying to be creepy, there. And again, that said, there are people that will come and like, excuse me, what are you doing? And then you just smile, explain exactly what you're doing. And the majority of the time, that's fine. I specifically remember one time erasing a file, literally once in years. And simply because the guy was on the verge of losing his shit. And it wasn't a newsworthy photograph. I'm like, it wasn't necessarily art. I didn't think that the world was going to just stop and sing my praises because of that one frame. So I personally didn't find a reason to make his day worse by holding on to it. So I'm like, okay, no problem. Now, if this were newsworthy, if I had just what's called like definitive proof of the shooter in the grassy knoll, I don't care if that guy asked me to, because I'm hightailing it to the wire and getting that up there. It's a whole other thing. Don't like everybody can do it the way they want. I just feel any given frame is not going to make my lifetime. I'm out there because I enjoy doing it. I don't really want to upset anybody. I don't typically upset anybody. I'm also very quick and discreet in how I shoot. Some people like to do street portraiture, which I love, but that has a level of involvement and I do that too. But I'm actually taking portraits, of course, the person's 100% aware of what, and we've communicated. And then there's another school of street photographers that walk around with a flash, like what's his name? Bruce Gilden was
Bruce
the one, yeah, who made him famous, and predating him. And right now, people are all over the streets running around with a flash, jumping into people's faces. And I've seen some very, very interesting work that way, but it's not my style because it can freak you out. Like if you're going to get knocked out by somebody, that's probably the precursor to a black eye. And actually, I just recently heard there was a photographer in New York, Trevor something. Well, okay, yeah. So I've heard of it, and apparently he got accosted. I didn't go beyond that. I heard about it. I didn't. I think you can find a video on it somewhere, but or him talking about it. But I'm like, oh, I didn't need to. I know how he works. He seems like a nice guy. So like I don't think he just upset somebody by being him. He just did something that by its nature is aggressive. So you're more likely to inspire somebody to be mean to you if you jump in their face with a flash. And again, most of the time that doesn't even bother people because they don't even know what just happened. So you kind of shock people and ideally you move on. But I'm not pontificating on what's right, what's wrong. It's just not my personal thing. And in the way that I go about doing it, I've yet to really have more than a handful of people ever even question it. And then again, except for the one, after I give them my explanation, I smile and I'm completely transparent. Cool. Thank you. Have a nice day. And sometimes they even get thanked. So Does that answer your question? Cool. Can anybody have any more questions or want to talk about
Just a
anything?
quick technical
Sure.
question.
Certainly.
So on those slower shutter speed shots, like the World
Mhm.
Cup one in France and
Right.
the one with the camera with stabilization in Washington, D.C., do you recall what the shutter speed was on those?
I do not. Again, yeah.
I was just curious
Well, yeah,
because they're
yeah.
definitely slower one third. I was just
Well,
curious how slow
yes,
you went.
yes. With okay, I can't even imagine with the I don't really have to be that much slower than a 30th. The nighttime Washington D.C. shot because I'm at a an intersection standing in the street, and once these cars again they've got the green. A 30th of a second, again, depending on how fast, again, whether they were just from a standstill or not, you could easily get that. I think with like the Sonys or any of the modern, it's called the in-body stabilization cameras nowadays. I think you should. Well, again, I can't say should. I'm fairly steady with any camera, so it just giving me what's good the in-body stabilizer then just makes me better. But I don't think you'd have a hard time at a 15th of a second, really.
For
So,
what
and
it's
then
worth, sorry,
good.
didn't mean to step over you there, Keith.
No,
No,
no.
because I shoot with Leica. I also shoot a lot with Sony, but for what it's worth in practice, I can go down to 1/5 or 1/4 of a second handheld for slow motion stuff if I want to, or long exposure stuff.
Mhm.
And it stuff that isn't moving is frozen really nicely, and stuff that is, you get your. I don't know that I want to go any more than that typically in
All
the
right.
stuff that I shoot if I'm,
Unless you
you.
want it very abstract with everything being blurred.
Well, that's
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
You can push it however far you want. It's just a question of what you want to, how
Mhm.
you want to portray it, I suppose.
Yeah.
But
There's a,
yeah, in practice, I find like for people, we took my sister to Disneyland, and they have those rotating cups and things like that, and so there's some really nice, and the merry-go-round and stuff. You can get a lot of really cool motion kind of photographs, and those I did like with a quarter of a second or 1/5
cool.
second, and it seems to work fine. I think for Leica, I'm not sure that I would. My hand probably isn't as steady as Keith's, but I probably wouldn't be as successful with going that slow. So maybe more like a 1/15th or 1/30th of a second, maybe for that.
Yeah.
But
Which again is again for most purposes, that's fine. I know with the World Cup one, like I had mentioned, I put it on a rail. So again, that was a subway
yeah,
entrance. So people were going down, which is again why you had all that particular motion. So I was able to set it right on the rail. Again, you can use all sorts of stuff. You can use a car hood. You can use a trash can. Yeah, there's a lot of times you'll find just a retaining wall or something like that. I said I use my friend's head. I would actually recommend going forward if you're going to use a body part to use somebody's shoulder and not their head. It's actually more stable. But
unless they
again,
have a flat head. But
yeah, and he did have a pretty flat haircut. We were in the Navy and he had a high and tight. So yeah, it didn't work out perfectly, but I tried. And then you can also just put it on the ground and then just tilt it up. Sometimes you can use your foot if you want to have, depending on how long it's going to be, you can put it on the ground and use your foot to just bounce, like aim it up a little bit. So, which also gives you another interesting angle. It's the idea that necessity is the mother of invention. Sometimes you'll come across your best shots when you have absolutely no idea how you're going to get it done. And so, like, if you got nothing to lose, you can take all sorts of risks. And if you're just going about things in your day to day and you're not really thinking about this, you don't think, oh, what if I put this down here? What if I did something else? But suddenly you have to wonder how you're going to hold this thing at, say, a half a second. Now you got to get creative. And so suddenly you start thinking of things that you wouldn't have thought of, and one thing leads to another, and you open up a whole new bag of tricks. And now you got different things to pull from later on in your photo career. I can't think of her name, but we're talking about like excessively slow shutter speeds. Her first name is Olga. She only
I
shoots
know who
black
she
and
is. I've seen her books too. She takes very slow
Yeah.
shots.
oh my God, her
Seen
work
her on
is
Instagram.
stunning.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's where I saw her on
Yeah.
Instagram.
We saw her.
And so I started looking her up recently,
Yeah.
and her work is stunning. And
Yeah.
it's black and white. Everything is super slow, and she's obviously purposely moving the camera. She's not just not just holding it. So the things she's introducing camera movement to it. So you start to recognize kind of what she's doing by the way you start to recognize how various movements affect the look. So you can kind of reverse engineer what she's doing. That all said, even if you know what she's doing, it's hard to do. Again, we all could be trying to do the exact same thing, and all of us will make it look different anyway. So like her work is amazing. I don't
Her
see me
name is
trying.
Karlovac, Olga
Yeah.
Karlovac.
I
I
K
was
go.
A
just
R
looking
L
up.
O
Yeah,
V A
that's
C.
Thank you.
yeah.
Thanks for again. So yeah,
Yeah, you,
Becky, if you haven't heard of her, look her up. Her work is you'll love it. It's stunning.
There's also another artist in New York. His name is Igor Posner, Posner. I think he has some books out of Red Hook
Hmm,
Publishing in Brooklyn. He
that's
does
cool.
some slow shutter work as well.
That's cool. Yeah, there's so many. That's yeah. Again, I can't paint. You barely draw. Yeah, if it wasn't for photography, I'd have nothing. So I actually have a job, and I don't want a job. So the I'm glad that we can all do things with the same tools and get different results. So it makes the world so much more fun. So I'm assuming everybody here, like Becky, you're the only person here who I actually know how long you've been shooting. So uh, have you all been shooting for a long time? And Bob, I know about you too, pretty much.
yeah,
Uh,
I helped Louis Daguerre set up that photo. Yeah.
yeah, well,
Uh,
I was mentioning to
Feels
Becky
like it
earlier.
sometimes. Huh?
I was mentioning to Becky at one point that my older daughter, I'm pretty sure thinks I predate that photo. So yeah, because you ask her what's good. I really think was because she thinks that I saw like photo technology come around, but that's what happens when you have kids.
That's right.
So yeah, on slow shutter speed photography, I think we've got it pretty much wrapped. Anybody have any other questions on that? Okay, I've got answers. I sometimes don't know the questions. It's
I have maybe a stupid question.
sure.
So today is the Matsuri Festival in Phoenix, and it's
Mhm.
not technically a street. Can you still call it street photography?
Oh, totally. Yeah, see,
Yeah.
street photography is almost like you don't need to be so literal. It doesn't have to be a street. It's in a way, it's kind of like a mindset, again, and how you approach it. And there's different types. I mean, even if you're on the street, there's like artistic, uh, like not geographic, it's geometric based. Some people are all about the light. Some people are all about the moment. Some people there's just different ways to go about in one setting or another. Like some people do street photography, there's almost nobody in it. Some people there is nobody in it, which again we should probably lean more toward architectural photography at that point. But I think you can still open it up. When I was shooting weddings, I honestly 100% believe that once you really start embracing street photography, it makes, unless you're a food photographer, and I'm sure there's a way to work that into it, but in most genres of photography, I think if you really embrace street photography, I think it sharpens you in every other aspect. So whether you're a concert photographer, a wedding photographer, an event photographer, even a portrait photographer, like a family photographer, if you embrace just the way that street photography helps you see and react and compose on the fly, I think it just makes you better across the board. So you don't have to even consider yourself a street photographer. You can use street photography just as a tool to strengthen, just like going to the gym. So everything translates from one genre to the next if you are open to how it works. But as one category, I honestly do think that was good. It's one of the the trickier categories, and it makes everything come along with it better. So no, I've again in Phoenix, I love going to one of my favorite things to do of the year was to go to the Maricopa County Fair.
Mm.
And again, I've got a stack of things that haven't seen the air, and that I always wonder how I'm going to drip and drab out into Instagram somehow or whatnot. But I start to get onto themes, and all of a sudden, okay, well, this isn't going to fit into this week, and then another week goes by and something else pops up, and eventually these things just sit in your in the digital shoebox that just becomes this collection of photographs, hundreds of thousands big, that you just never get a chance to go through until one day it's like, again, like the shoebox metaphor of like a mole, and they used to always toss all your photographs in that, and you forget about them until you're ready to move. And all of a sudden you pull that box out, like, oh, then half your day when you should be packing is spent looking through these photographs you haven't seen in however long. Well, that's what happens with so many of these. So yeah, I know. Okay, looping back, you don't have to be in the street to be a street photographer. It helps to get there sometimes, but yeah, there's no hard, fast rule. Oddly, documentary photography, like street photography, is like documentary photography is kind of like street photography, but with a purpose. Like street photography is, again, like you can be a hunter, or a gatherer or fisher, however you want, whichever analogy you want to use. But a lot of times it's just a matter of you're there, what comes along. If you're using the hunting metaphor, you're looking for something, but you're not looking to have a start, middle, and end. You're just, okay, this is coming along, I'm going to aim at that. The only thing that really separates that from being a documentary photographer is if you walk out and you go, I'm going to specifically illustrate something with a beginning, a middle, and an end, and I'm going to take, say, some details, some establishing shots, and some middle-level shots. Like really, a lot of what documentary does is already done by street. The only difference is an actual purpose. So street photographers are documentarians with no particular aim, in my opinion.
You know, what's particularly liberating about all this is that you get to a point when you start doing different, we like to put titles on things. We're a street photographer, we're a travel photographer, we're a wedding photographer. After a while, you start doing different things. You're just a photographer, and I think that's probably the way to approach it, because then it's an open heart, open mind thing. You just basically, whatever situation you find yourself in, you can pick up on things, you can observe things, you can adapt to whatever the circumstances are. And I think that's the beautiful thing about photography, is you almost lose the titles. You just simply are a photographer. And I think that to me is like the best thing at this stage in my life. I mean, I've done a lot of different kinds of things, but I don't look at it in terms of titles. I just think of myself as a photographer, and I think that's helpful for me.
Yeah, again, because it definitely, what's going to eases an argument when somebody wants to like label and compartmentalize and say, well, there's a hard fast, you have to be doing this to be called X, or you have to be doing that to be called Y. In the end, who cares? As long as you enjoy. In terminology, again, photography is one of those things, especially if you're teaching it. Terminology can be important, because otherwise you want to make sure that what you're telling somebody, that you're on the same page. Like, you're not saying, oh, turn this, and they're actually dialing in something else. Some people, but within certain parameters, you can say, okay, like zone focusing versus scale focusing. Same thing. Like, I think I've heard a diatribe on why it needs to be scale focusing versus zone focusing. I'm like, that's a part of your life you're never getting back. Like going down that, like all the time it took you to come up with that, it's out there now and no one cares. Like, pick your arguments, pick your battles. What you call
Yeah.
something, no one really cares. As long as it's close enough that it's not so wildly off, you just like whatever. I don't even want to get myself in trouble by making something up right now.
Mhm.
But yeah, we're all photographers. Then yeah, obviously a food photographer is different than this, but we're photographers. And was it years ago when I was in school? I'll make this quick. This one person I remember, she just couldn't get outside of what's the exact specific things that she was taught. She was taught that this had to be at this setting and this at this, and if you didn't do that, it wasn't right. And I'm like, no, it's a starting point. And so some friends and I were trying to, and she just absolutely couldn't wrap her head around how one thing could be applied to the next and the next and the next. Like you can take in a different example, portrait photographer, everything that you can do in that is relatable in portrait photography can be scaled over to still life. Light is light, cameras are cameras. And just in one situation, your subject might be breathing and moving, and the other it's not. Other than that, let's go to just, it's the same thing. You might pull in specialized tools, but in a nutshell, it's photography. It's capturing light at a certain, it's a small box that lets in a certain quantity of light at a certain speed. Done. What you pointed at, how you do it, whether it's sharp, whether it's not, whether it's whatever, large format or tiny, same thing.
Mhm.
So yeah, I'm not that picky on compartmentalizing the whole thing. I prefer to see not to overutilize the photography thing, but I don't know. I'm trying to think. Was it no pun intended? So I'll no pun intended before I even say what I'm going to say. The big picture. So yeah, that didn't come across. And it didn't mean it for it to be funny, and thank God because it wasn't. So
You sound like somebody who's had those kids, and the kids give you that deadpan look when you tell them those kinds of jokes, right?
oh yeah,
I know that feeling well.
and just about everything else. So yeah, so yeah, this is the first again. I apologize if I've gone way off in the weeds here and there. You guys are my test masterclass group. I appreciate your patience. I hope that I was able to enlighten you on something. I hope you all at least took something out of this whole thing that you didn't come in with. Or if I said nothing new, I hope I at least solidified something that you were thinking.
You
So
did a great job, Keith. Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you.
Really,
Thank
really
you.
appreciated that. And
Yeah, thank you.
forward to the next one.
yeah. So, and as far as that goes, this topic was a write-in. So somebody had asked me to cover this. I'm like, oh, that's great, as good a place as any to start. So if anybody has anything that they would like covered, feel free to send it in. I'm going to look it over and make up the next one for next month.
Can I just throw something into the ring here real
course.
quick since I have you? So, and this does not have to be like, I'm not pushing for this for the very next, time we get together, but something I've always wanted to see is how to sequence, so once you have, you have a certain body of work, how do you, how do you, for an exhibit or for a book or something, what are some of the things you need to think about when you want to see, devise a sequence or grouping of photographs? And for me, because I mean, I've got, hard drives full of stuff. I mean, I've got a lot of stuff from over the years, and I'm trying to, you know, begin to get at this issue,
Mhm.
both in terms of what I want to display on walls and so forth, and then hopefully also at some point if I can put books together or whatever it is, but just developing that approach where, I can come up with a way of being able to kind of come up with groupings and sequences of images that in some cases tell a story. Maybe they're standalone, maybe there's some photos that don't need to be with other photos or that kind of thing. But
Yeah.
I've never really I've never really, I mean, maybe it's out there. I don't claim to know all of the information that's out there, but just some kind of, you know, coherent explanation for like how you would go about something like that.
That's that's a pretty heavy
So
topic. That
it
that would
is,
be
yeah.
good.
And it's not something that, like I said, I mean, there's a lot of technique stuff out there, which is valid, is there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, I learned a
No,
lot from
no,
that over
yeah.
the years. But
Well, this
but
is
but I've never seen that. That's something I would really love to kind of pick people's brains on about how they would go about you know,
well,
formulating, putting
yeah.
together a body of work like that.
Yeah, that's again, that is a graduate level question right there. So that's I just got to figure out how to put that. Definitely right now that's beyond my Zoom abilities. So, but I'm gonna give that a lot of thought. Uh, yeah, how to put that on like on the screen. That's
Or even if
when
you
we
even
yeah,
if
when
you
I
know of
yeah.
something
Well,
that's
if I can
out
find some
there,
resources and stuff, I'll figure out
right?
a way, I'll figure out a way to put it out. But I could just say in a nutshell, like when I've done it in the past, it's just a lot of uh, what I found to be the best. And I remember working with as I told you, Bob, in the past. I worked with are you all familiar with photographer Ralph Gibson? He's
Mhm.
so he's a so those of you who aren't, he's a famous fine art photographer. And so my first job out of school was I was his assistant. So he used to have his own publishing company and he thinks in books. Like he's a master sequencer and like he's got a gazillion books out there. I've got a few of them on my shelf over here. And I used to see him but he'd been doing it for years. So he would just put them up in InDesign and kind of know what should go where. When I was doing it, I find all the photographs that I'm considering, I don't be over cast a wide net. Just don't even worry about it. Just choose your topic, print out. But literally, the way I would do it and the way I have done it is print the workout small, like 4x6s, and then just throw them on. Literally, just I put them on the floor. You put them on the floor, spread them out, figure out where you want to start. Just it's like a big puzzle piece, like a big jigsaw puzzle. Grab one, and then you start looking around. And this is totally by gut at the moment. So this isn't what's called like how like yeah, I'm not going to teach this in college or I'm not going to stake anything on this other than the way I've done it. And literally you look at that and suddenly you're going to start to notice relationships and you grab another and you kind of hold them, you put them on a whiteboard side by side. And for the most part, they're immediately going to tell you whether they want to be together or not. And don't give this too much thought. So if right off the bat you go, no, just cast it aside, go for another one. And then you just keep doing that. And eventually you're going to start, as you're going through this, you're going to start to notice relationships, whether it's in subject matter, whether it's in color, whether it's in the shapes that are within it's just going to start to make sense. Like it's hard for me to like Becky is a graphic designer. She would be probably better at explaining this than I am. But from an intuitive standpoint, it just seems to work that way, like for me. And again, this doesn't necessarily equate to what we're like to putting this on Zoom, but it's an exercise. If you guys want to try it, I would recommend. You just get yourself a whole bunch of your own photographs and just hold. And then once you've got your pairings, and if you can do pairings. I don't like my page to be too busy. Like sometimes one on either side because it works whether they're going to be on the same page or just facing each other. So then when you start to get these, and it's funny, you'll start to put things together that you never thought you would have put together. Like you'll start to see, hey, Katie, you'll start to see things come together that you didn't even see in your own work. And so it's actually kind of enlightening. So you start to move these things around, and then you got a pairing that you like, and then as you're moving through and you're working another pairing, you'll see, oh, wait, this actually, I think would work better over on, with this other one. And so then it just becomes this mix and match until you're just satisfied. It takes a while, but it seems it just, yeah, again, this isn't necessarily I don't know, maybe the word I'm looking for, but yeah, it is from an intuitive level, it works, and you're going to find things in your work that you didn't know were there. And if you keep doing it, it'll work its way into your shooting. But
Right.
I don't really, yeah, I don't, in my own personal shooting, I don't spend a lot of time thinking. I'm reactionary. I've been doing this for so long. My mental database is so full at this point that it comes together as the camera's coming up. Sometimes I'm definite and I will see and I will plan, but the majority of the time, better than 75% of the time, the entire picture comes together as it's coming up to my eye. Like I see all the pieces just there, and then they get framed in a split second, and then I'm off. So this all happened, and you just get faster at it. And that's with the photography part, and with if you start to want to design books, you just get better at it. And you just start to see these things, and whether you can explain it or not, doesn't matter to anybody as long as you're happy with it. And then when you're happy with it, there's somebody else that's going to be happy with it. If you go out to just please the public, you're lost. You've lost the battle because you're not necessarily going to be happy. Once you're happy, we all have somebody that sees and appreciates how we see. So they're your target, and they're your target because you're not even giving them any thought. You're making yourself happy. You're doing the best that you can do for you. And then once that happens, the people that are meant to see your work and appreciate it are going to, and the ones that weren't going to anyway. And if you find a way to make them happy, you're not happy because it's not how you see. And then you can't keep them happy when you now are going through the paces of doing something that you don't even want to do. So then everybody loses. So yeah, that was a completely off topic kind of thing, but I think there's a thread in there somewhere.
Well, I kind of took you there, so that's my fault. No, I agree. I mean, I have, and I've sort of made my attempts at having the physical prints, because I don't think, I mean, I'm sure I'm probably wrong on this, but there probably is a computer version. You can move stuff around, but there's just nothing like having the physical print,
no,
and you can kind of
Yeah,
compose
there
things,
is,
position things.
yeah, there's
Yeah.
definitely was good software that you can do all sorts of stuff, but I personally just don't. And again, it could be an age thing. But I like tactile. I like to be able to just move stuff
Yeah.
with my hands, and when I see it on the screen, like that's step two. Once
Mhm.
I've got my little boards laid out, then I'll go in and okay, then you can sit there and go, okay, this will work. So again, it looks like we just lost Larry. And so, sorry, hopefully everything's good. And yeah, so personally, I like the tactile. From there, you can go into your computer and tweak, and that works because you eventually have to get it into a digital realm anyway. So,
Right.
but I like to
Yeah, I didn't
start
mean to steal the show here.
all
It
good.
was, since you asked about topics, it was something that I've been thinking about a lot recently in terms of going through my work and really beginning to figure out how I want to present that, how I want to compose that in terms of whether it's a book, whether it's you know, something I could show someday,
Mhm.
but just to think about how I want to organize the different things that I've been doing. So
Cool. Well, I'm getting the hook over here. So again, I thank you all. Again, I really appreciate your coming out to the to the first. And I will, as these things go on, I will do my best to tighten them up. But I'm a full answer kind of guy. So like I try not to make things too brief. I try not my best not to stretch them out longer than they need to be, but I can obviously go off on tangents. So always in the future, feel free to, if you want to go in a certain, if the direction is going off, you feel free to pull it back in. But again, I'm always here for any questions you got. You got the topic, then the open, and I'm going to figure this whole Zoom thing out, and you guys are helping me out tremendously. So I'm learning as much just by doing this as I hope you learned. Probably more, because I'm sure you literally all had just one little thing you wanted to learn. I'm learning more from this whole meeting than you guys are. So thank you.
You
So-
did
Thanks,
great.
Keith. Great job.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so
buddy.
much.
Very helpful.
Nice
So-
meeting everybody.
Nice to meet you all. Yeah, if you guys could have any comments, any criticisms, any platitudes, whatever. Again, I'm just wide open for feedback.
How
So
would you prefer us to contact you, Keith? If
however, email works. Yeah, I can. Yeah, so I have all your emails. So I'll make sure. Yeah, so which I think you should have mine. If not, I'll send an email out to everybody just so that you have mine. And again, nothing like I don't expect anything, but if you have the time and you would be so kind, that would be great. Wonderful.
And are you
Thank you.
going to be uploading this to
Well, yeah, I'm gonna put it up on YouTube and
on
so-
YouTube? Okay. Okay.
Yeah, so it'll
we
go
can
up on
refer to
YouTube.
it.
Right, and then so weekly for a while, I'm going to be doing interviews. Monthly, I'm going to be doing the master class. So I'll be putting this stuff up pretty regularly on YouTube.
Cool.
So yeah, welcome to my digital world.